This week, Ryan Freed from Brooks Running is with us to discuss threat hunting on a $0 budget. Then Joseph Carson from Delinea shares a real-world history of a ransomware attack. Finally, in the enterprise security news, Normalize and Flow Security raise money to protect data. Axio and Lumu raise money to assess risk. BitSight intends to acquire third-party trust, which is a company, not the concept. They're not acquiring the concept of third-party trust. Flashpoint acquires EchoSec Systems. ZeroFox goes public. Rumble rebrands as RunZero. Trusting Amazon with medical records. Taking cryptocurrency off the payment menu. AWS's CISO tells us why AWS is so much better than their competitors. And an ancient dial-up internet service returns. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
The shift to remote and hybrid work over the past 2 years has accelerated application development on cloud infrastructure. However, securing these new assets has lagged behind. Qualys CloudView, the next generation of cloud security posture management, delivers an end-to-end multi-cloud security and compliance solution encompassing the entire application lifecycle from build to runtime. CloudView enables enterprises to assess their cloud security and compliance posture, identify risks and gaps, auto-remediate issues, proactively enforce best practices, and prove compliance in audits rapidly and efficiently. Identify your most vulnerable cloud assets by visiting securityweekly.com/Qualys. Managing and protecting the world's grueling number of endpoints, enabling Tanium's customers to see, control, and protect every endpoint everywhere. Tanium's mission is to provide certainty in uncertain times with the industry's only converged endpoint management. Trusted by the U.S. military and the majority of the Fortune 100, Tanium helps manage and protect nearly 30 million endpoints. Tanium, the power of certainty. Visit securityweekly.com/Tanium to learn more.
Attacks can't be prevented, but they can be stopped. Modern cyber attackers have already made it inside your network, but you have the upper hand. Find and eradicate threats with ExtraHop network detection and response, and shut them out before real damage is done. Learn the advanced techniques attackers are using and how ExtraHop stops them with a live attack simulation. Register at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. That's extra HOP.
Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy Presidential Joke Day. This is episode 284, recorded on Thursday, August 11th, 2022. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is the Czar of Zero Trust, the captain of content, Katie Tytler. How are you, Katie?
Hello. Hi. How are you? Do you have any good presidential jokes? I do not, because I was not prepared.
So it's interesting because, the way this sounds, it's like, is it making fun of the president or the president making jokes? And apparently where it came from was presidents making jokes. So the backstory on this is August 11th, 1984. So almost, 38 years ago. During a sound check for a Saturday evening radio broadcast, President Ronald Reagan joked, "My fellow Americans, I'm pleased to tell you today that I've signed legislation that will outlaw Russia forever. We begin bombing in 5 minutes." Since 1982, the networks have agreed comments made during sound checks were off the record. However, somebody leaked the recording to the general public, and it blew up. It was apparently a big deal. And Yeah. So that's how it started, I guess. I don't know why
it's a pretty good joke. I'm not sure it would be today, but in 1984, it was probably pretty funny. Well, yeah, maybe not. Yeah. I was younger then. Maybe the situation was just as tense, but yeah.
For the president to joke that bombing is going to begin in 5 minutes, holy crap. Like, that would have stock market implications and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, that probably wasn't a particularly good time to do it either. Yeah.
Yeah. I think
trying to find a way to make it better. I'm not sure, but maybe we should stick to making fun of the president jokes.
Yeah. If you're the president, maybe the only kind of joke you can really safely pull off is a self-deprecating one, or like a really corny dad joke or something like that. I don't know.
Oh, we have corny dad jokes during our sound check, for sure.
Indeed. All right, so quick announcement here, and we will get to our first interview. If you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover in one of the shows, you can submit your suggestions for guests by going to securityweekly.com/guest and completing that form that you find there. We review these suggestions once a month, and we'll reach out to you once we have reviewed them. All right, and today's topic is modern threat hunting with your SIEM on a $0 budget. We're excited to have Ryan Freed, senior security engineer from Brooks, running with us again today. This is actually the second time he's come on. Last time, I think the topic was SOAR. And Ryan holds a master's degree in cybersecurity, has worked in the field for 9 years, and is also a professor and teaches cybersecurity at a college and has done that for 7 years. And he currently works for Brooks Running as a senior security analyst, specializing in security automation, network segmentation, and purple teaming. Welcome, Ryan.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for having me back. Really excited.
Yeah, me too. It's always good to get. We love having guests on that give perspectives that we don't necessarily have. Or like for me, it's been over a decade now since I've been on the enterprise side. So I love getting that insight. I think people were just starting to build SOCs back when I was getting out of, moving into different parts of the industry, so how people handle detection and response, is really interesting to me, because it seems like that's come a long way in the last decade.
Yeah, it really has. And I think even in the last few years, we've gone from, we have an EDR, we're covered, we'll just totally trust them, to actually making them prove it, not only during POCs, but actually when we have the product. So we're constantly adding feature requests, different searches that we'll talk about to make sure we can catch things that our EDR might not catch.
Right. Yeah. So this term threat hunting, again, 10 years ago, I don't think I'd ever heard the term. And it seems like it could be applied fairly broadly, like any kind of activity, where you're just kind of combing through your stuff, looking for evidence that something funny is going on, which I find really interesting, because back when I used to train incident responders, the first thing I tell them is that they need to get a baseline. They need to get familiar with the logs and events in their environment, because in the midst of an incident, this very emotional, it's different for different people. Some people get very calm. Some people get stressed out during an incident. But if you're not familiar with your stuff, there's crazy stuff in your logs. If you've never looked, like there's all kinds of stuff that could take you down just a random rabbit hole that has nothing to do with the incident that you're working on. So, I wonder if there's a connection there. And in most organizations, does threat hunting and IR overlap? So tell us what threat hunting means to you.
Yeah, so it actually relates to my previous talk when we talked about security automation. So analysts have these mundane tasks that take up potentially a majority of their time. So once we can use automation to clear those off their plate, what they really enjoy, at least on our team and from many analysts I talk to, is that threat hunting. So it's proactively looking in your environment for common techniques, tactics, and procedures that attackers are having. And with MITRE ATT&CK, they make it extremely easy. So it's basically looking through our environment, learning what's normal, because there are remote management tools that are used for support, just like any service desk needs to use. But it's important to know, do you use AnyDesk? Do you use TeamViewer? And if you don't, then having some kind of alerting and investigation based off of that.
Yeah, is it normal to see PS exec? You really want to know if scripts are using that, admins are using some of these sysinternal tools, some of these living off the land binaries, as they call them, the LOL binaries. right?
Yeah, and ironically, the most noisy tools that are running things like Whoami or running port scans are the security tools. Our noisiest ones are things like Windows Defender, or like they mentioned Tanium in one of the ads. They are purposely pretty intrusive to try to map out your network. So you need to filter through a lot of noise, which ironically are the tools that typically security manages. But then you find different programs like WeChat, which may seem like a simple desktop app, but if you read through the permissions and see how it actually reacts in your network, it's actually mapping out your network. It's looking at what other devices are on there. So understanding if that's normal or if it's a business need is pretty interesting. And those are the kinds of things that you find during threat hunting.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's when I used to work at Thinkst, our Canary device, one of the things it can do is detect port scans, and that's one of the interesting things. A lot of customers, when first putting this thing into place, you really don't know how many things are mapping out and scanning your network until you put in some detections for that kind of thing. So they get a lot of surprises, and we learned about a lot of commercial products that do network scans.
Yeah, and one of our current projects is looking at what incoming traffic do you see from workstations or into workstations. And at first thought, you'd think, well, there's probably not many things that communicate from workstation to workstation, but you find a lot of things like WeChat that I just found. So it's fun to get that data-driven type approach to find out what actually is talking, does it need to, and then putting controls around it. So yeah, we've found many interesting things through threat hunting. One of them, I found this company, my last company, is scripts that run passwords in clear text. Sure, it's SSH, but if you look at the command line argument and the password is in clear text, that's a huge vulnerability that your EDR is not going to report on.
Right. And pretty common too, to find passwords in scripts.
Yep.
Talking about WeChat, are you talking about the app on your phone, or is there like a desktop?
There's
like
an
Electron.
There's a desktop app too. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Is it one of those Electron-based apps?
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter. Really,
Yeah.
it's just I imagine it's similar to Signal and a bunch of Slack and a bunch of. They're all based on Electron behind the scenes. Not that it matters. It's it's super interesting. So yeah, talking about when threat hunting, I imagine some of it is just going through your stuff, getting familiar with what's going on in your network, but also, how do you get new ideas for things that you should be able to detect? And what is the process for implementing those ideas? So I guess two-part question: where do the ideas come from? Where do you find new ideas for things that you should be able to detect and spot when they happen? And then how do you integrate those into the environment there?
Yeah, good news for your listeners. It has never been easier. We have probably 3 or 4 different security blogs or Twitter people that we follow. MITRE Analytics is fantastic. Red Canary is great. I like Scythe and CISA. They all come out with articles that talk about threat actor of the week. And beyond the indicators of compromise of IP addresses and domains and hashes, it'll actually talk about the technique that the threat actors take for that initial compromise, or how they move laterally, or how they exfil data. And now with MITRE ATT&CK, it'll actually reference the sub-technique, so you can map that back if you're doing some control validation with Atomic Red Team. But you don't even need that. It'll show things like, for PowerShell, if you see flags like execution bypass or invoke expression or encode, it'll lay out that command line argument that you can look for. And then you can put those into searches into your SIEM or your EDR. So yeah, I've just over the years have found some sources that I really like. And then I think sometimes the intimidating thing is coming up with those searches. But you can start really simple, saying, command prompt as the process, with the parent process being PowerPoint, Excel, Microsoft Word, or command prompt as the process or parent process with something like who am I, or net group domain administrator. Really, really common recon type commands that attackers use almost in any situation. So we start small. We see if there was any hits for it, which sometimes there are with security vendors like I talked about, but usually it takes a week or two, filter out the noise, then confidently find no hit results. Then you validate it. So running net group domain admin, making sure there's a hit, that your query is correct. And then usually by the third or fourth week, we can put an alert that we have pretty high fidelity on. And we've caught pen testers like that, or we've caught some malware that way with queries that our EDR didn't pick up on, but are super common amongst many threat actors.
Hey, Ryan, sorry, joining in a little late here. I guess one question around that is, how do you prioritize, right? So you just mentioned 3 of your favorites, but how do you actually, on a week like this where you've got, I can't remember the number, let's call it 100, be nice, say new vulnerabilities from being patched on Patch Tuesday. How do you figure out where do you start in that process and not just get overloaded on just dealing with new queries?
Sure. So like I said, the sources I look at maybe come out with an article or 2 per week. And I usually read a certain amount of articles and then try to find the lowest common denominator. Like I said, most ransomware could start off with phishing. There's almost always some kind of recon within the network. So I try to find the lowest common denominator, not necessarily on the vulnerability from something like a Patch Tuesday or vulnerabilities that come out, but more on the tactics, techniques, and procedures that hackers are taking. One great one I like with, so Scythe has a GitHub repository with common actors, and then they map the atomic test based on it. And they actually have one of the top 10 tactics, techniques, and procedures for ransomware. And being in retail and e-commerce, ransomware is something we're thinking about every day. So that was easy to pick the first one to look at what those command line arguments must be. But in the end, anything is better than nothing. You're never going to get to all the different vulnerabilities. So starting off with something that's impactful to your industry. I mean, ransomware is impactful in almost every industry. I would start there.
So you mentioned something I think is worth pointing out there, and I think I interpreted this correct. You were saying when you find something, an interesting new detection that you want to put in, you don't just build the detection in the hopes that you catch it happening in the future. It sounds like you're also looking through your systems to see if it's already happened.
Yes, and we've found things historically that happened within the last month. So yeah, you're looking backwards, then hopefully catching things in the future.
Yeah, so that's something that I'm not sure if that's intuitive to everyone. Generally I think, okay, I set up a new detection to catch things in the future. I don't think about a new detection catching things that have already happened in the past. So I think that felt important to me to point out.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it can look, in the future, in the past. And like I said, you'll see different tactics. This is kind of threat hunting. Like I listened to Security Weekly, and they talked about with macros being disabled for Microsoft from the internet, hackers are starting to use ISOs or LNK files. And taking that information, I looked at our email security product and made sure that we're blocking ISO files and LNK files. And then had to look in the past to see if there is a legitimate business case. And that I would consider that threat hunting. You're taking intelligence that you hear, not just, bad IP addresses, and then applying it to your environment. So like you said, it's a pretty broad term, but anything you can do to take real world intelligence and what hackers are doing and apply that to your environment you're increasing the security posture of your company.
So since we're talking about threat hunting on a zero budget, right? You're talking about tools you have deployed already in your arsenal, which is great because you can do a lot with that. But what about companies that are maybe smaller, not as mature, don't have a lot of resources? Are there some tools that you can recommend, techniques you can recommend, maybe open source tools that people can use to get started and put them ahead of the game, even if they don't have everything they might eventually need deployed?
Sure. Yeah. The only assumption I was going off of was some kind of endpoint EDR product. Maybe you have a SIEM repository where you're sending all of your logs. But as far as threat intel, all you need to do is find 3 or 4 different websites where you like the content and they make it easy, like the ones I mentioned prior. I really like Atomic Red Team as an open source tool that does control validation. So it basically looks at all the common techniques from initial recon to eventually data exfil, and it runs a test on that endpoint, and you can see what got blocked. If it didn't get blocked, what kind of detection can I write so I know that it actually happened? And that's something we do fairly often and is free. There are open source SIEMs like a Helk stack that you can use. But yeah, really all you need is the time to be able to read through articles, having that skill to be able to pull out different tactics and techniques. And then as far as writing the query, it can seem intimidating. But like I said, all you really need to do is start off with process equals command prompts or process equals PowerShell. And these are some things that were in the command line argument, and start from there. And it'll take you a little bit, but you'll eventually become proficient at it.
So on the other end of things, are there tools? There's a whole crop of new tools coming up, red teaming as a service, pen testing as a service, software and automated platforms. What's your thought on those? Are they helpful? Are they not helpful? Can you get the same result by being creative? Is it a good combination of things to use when you have the time and the resources?
Yeah, I think they are helpful. I think either with a smaller team who doesn't have red team experience, they automate everything for you. I think a lot of the value of those programs or tools are the reporting. We currently don't have a stringent reporting process. Our boss is nice and he lets us have fun with this. So yeah, they definitely have value. They keep up with the threats. They're constantly adding modules. We do it on a $0 budget with Atomic Red Team and Excel spreadsheets and different articles that we like to read. But for a team that maybe doesn't have the time or the expertise to run something like that, or they need more of a formal process, or they have a bigger environment to test against, I think there definitely is value in it.
Sure. And if you have a lot of budget, it can't hurt to use one of these tools and actually compare what you're getting on your own with what these tools are able to produce. And like you said, the reporting is nice because if you do have somebody in a more senior position who wants to see those details, usually these types of tools have some decent reporting that you can use if you're talking to the CIO or the CTO or the financial person or even the CEO.
Yeah, and it's funny to see the evolution over my career of what pen testing has come. So my first pen test 8 or 9 years ago that we were on the client side of, it was basically a Qualys scan of just vulnerabilities, and that was it. And we paid them a lot of money to do that. And now it's more companies of like red teaming or social engineering, where there might be an engagement for a week or two. They come in, they try to get domain admin or whatever your goal is, and that's great. But I know pen testers that are frustrated where they'll have findings and then it's the same findings the next year. So it's more of a point in time assessment. So I do really like, whether it's automated through these paid tools or Atomic Red Team, to have more of a continuous control validation, because threat actors change all the time. Tactics, techniques change all the time. So I think a combination of the two is helpful.
And also around the do you formalize testing these detections, making sure they work, regression testing, that kind of stuff?
We typically do it on our own workstations or our own security servers that aren't production reliable or relied upon by production servers. So it's relatively low risk. I wouldn't do this on any servers we needed uptime for. So it's pretty low stakes for the types of devices that we test on. Now, if you use the control validation software, like you mentioned prior, you'll want to do some testing with some, dev and test servers and make sure it mirrors production, so you're getting good value and you're actually finding out if your production servers would stand up against it. So with this low budget open source, we haven't had to do too much testing on our own workstations.
Right. And taking this back to SOAR, how does some of these, so this is something that we repeatedly see in the industries. We see a new company come out and say, oh, we're going to automatically protect things, like suggesting that you set a policy and like it's just going to rug pull people and like, put things back against the guardrails or whatever it might be. We see it in cloud security. We see it with SOAR stuff as well. Whereas when we actually talk to people, people are a little bit fearful of fully automating any kind of, most kinds of remediation. But pulling back around to SOAR, with these detections that you build, SOAR is still kind of like a, human check and then push a button and automate those manual steps, or do you end up fully automating anything here?
There's a few things that we fully automate. We have some alerts that will look at a domain, see that it's suspicious, and we'll create an alert. So we can take that alert, ingest it into SOAR, run the domain against virus total, look for however many hits, whatever threshold you pick, block the domain, close the ticket. Those are tickets that it's the same action every time. It could possibly take the security analyst 10 to 15 minutes between all the screens and things, but those are really predictable and really easy to automate. That's really the only alert. I actually wanted to circle back to something we talked about in our last conversation. So we recently had a risky user alert from Azure AD, which I'm sure many of your viewers have had or are trying to get a handle on. So we had an alert at about 6 a.m. on a Sunday morning. Through some kind of loophole that we've remediated, the attacker was able to bypass MFA, logged into the user's account. Previous to SOAR, we probably would have gotten around to that maybe Monday afternoon, working with different teams and such. But, with the important statistics or metrics, with no Chrome tabs and from, with their slippers on still under the covers, they were able to enumerate the user, find out if it's normal or not, enumerate the IP address, find out where it's coming from, who owns it, do a password reset, and revoke all Office 365 sessions from their phone using Teams. So it's manual, sure, but all of that was within an hour on a Sunday morning. So I think there definitely needs to be human involvement still for anything that's not a super predictable EDR or type alert.
Yeah, I love this story that we have linked in the show notes that I think you send us, where they describe this new ransomware attack as happening in roughly the time span of the Batman. Like
yeah.
The Batman is now a measurement of time, the length of that movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think there definitely needs to be that orchestration and response from a manual perspective. There aren't many alerts. Vendors talk about all the time of we'll automate all of your alerts, but you'll find when you talk to like your CTO or CIO, there's not necessarily the appetite for it. They might have had one bad experience. Like one good example is like account termination. Obviously, you want that to be done in a quick basis, but all it takes is one mishap of deleting 2,000 accounts because you didn't put the query in correctly, and having to manually rebuild those, which didn't happen to us, but I've heard about at different companies that really removes that full automation appetite. So, but our mean time to remediation is still much faster than it would have been between SOAR and some of these threat hunting detections.
2 hours and 56 minutes, by the way. That's how long the latest Robert Pattinson Batman is. Anything else you want to share with us before we go ahead and wrap up here, Ryan? I know you've got. I do want to direct people towards the show notes. You've got some good examples there of you've got a CISA alert there. The article I just mentioned about this quantum ransomware. Another one on Scythe about operationalizing Red Canary's 2022 threat detection report. Anything else you want to share before we go?
I think the last thing I want to share is this is all great to reduce the exposure or that quicker mean time to response or finding things your EDR doesn't find. But I also want to emphasize that this is fun for analysts. Don't try to formalize it and get all these metrics and things like that. Usually once a week or every other week, I'll send an article to some of the analysts and say, hey, get me a threat hunting search by the end of the week or something like that. And it's fun for them. I think sometimes you can get caught up in all of the alerts and closing out tickets and things like that. But I also think it's a really important skill, not only for your company, but for these people to be able to understand these types of techniques and let them have a little fun while doing it.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion because, I could see, and it depends on the mindset. Like some people's mindset, they look at the attack matrix and they want to systematically go through every single item, make sure they have detections for each one, which does not sound like it would be much fun to me or necessarily effective. So.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for joining us again on Enterprise Security Weekly today. I always enjoy these.
Cool. Thank you so much.
All right. Stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to hear some ransomware stories with Joseph Carson from Delinea.